Hey everybody, Chris here. First off, this is a part 2, so if you haven't listened to episode 39, you should go back and do that first. Second of all, this is a bonus episode, an example of what you might get if you became a patron to the podcast. We're going to be pretty soon starting patron-only episodes once or twice a month, in which you'll get tips from the pros that we interview, or short conversations between Nate and I and the rest of the team sometimes, and Q&As, much like this one with Steve Bechtel. You can become a patron at patreon.com/powercompanypodcast, or you can click on the podcast tab at powercompanyclimbing.com, and it should be self-explanatory how to sign up. If you don't want to become a patron, no big deal. We're still going to be giving you the same amount of free content that we do now, likely more in the future. That seems to be how we roll. Enjoy.
Maybe don't know.
This time, this time, this time, this time, this time to build. 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 This time power. This time to build power. This time to build power. This time to build.
We are back on. What's up, everybody? I am your host, Chris Hampton. Welcome to the Power Company Podcast, brought to you by PowerCompanyClimbing.com. I am sitting here in the good weather today, though it's sucked the last few days, in Lander, Wyoming, with fan favorite and honorary co-host Steve Bechtel. And we just had a conversation about his new book, Logical Progression, which all of you should have already gone out and picked up. If you have not already, get online and order it. It's on Amazon, right, Steve?
Yep.
Okay. You can get it on Amazon. Logical Progression is what it's called, using nonlinear periodization for year-round climbing performance. And I posited the question to, I guess I didn't really ask them a specific question, to our Facebook community group, and just told them I was going to be talking to Steve today. And, you know, for any of them who had read the book or just had general questions for Steve, they hit me with some good questions here. So good job, community. You guys are thinking out loud, and I love it. So let's just start from the top here, Steve. From Kyle Hendon, he says, and this could be a whole nother podcast and probably will be at some point, but why are second tier routes so overlooked, and why are they important? You do mention in the book that, you know, a lot of people spend more time projecting instead of at the second tier, which is an important place for them to be. But it's sort of an aside away from the main topic of the book. So let's just dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good point. The second tier is overlooked because I don't think it's as big an ego boost as sending a new hard route,
or sometimes even just saying I'm working on
my draws are
hard
on
route.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really great. Like, you know, to be on a route or to be seen on a route, but you've always got to remember that your ego is not always your best friend, and there is a time for projecting. And I think projecting way above your level is also appropriate at some times. But for the most part, the second tier is useful. Let me just describe second tier here in case somebody doesn't know. Mm-hmm. First tier would be the level that you're trying to red point, your hardest send, or maybe the grade above that. And then the second tier would be 2 and 3 grades below that. So if I'm projecting a 13C, second tier might be 13A or even 12D. And what's useful about second tier routes is that you can send them relatively quickly.
Right.
Yet they're probably not something that you could on-site. So they're giving you enough improvement stimulus that you actually have to be present for them. But like I said, you can do them quickly. Usually people can back off 2 to 3 grades and do those routes within 2 to 4 tries. And so one of the huge benefits of second tier is when you're peaking and you're red pointing really well, and say you're a weekend warrior, you're going to work on your project on Saturday and probably have some good goes on it. But here's how your Saturday looks. You go out and you do 2 pitches of 510, you do 1 pitch of 12A, and then you get on the project. You give the project a couple or 3 burns, and then you pack it in for the day because you've worn yourself out. What happens during that time, and Chris and I have talked about it in the past, is that your fitness is actually dropping because your efficiency is improving, and so we tend to get more efficient on these routes, and then we try to save ourselves. We aren't pushing outside our red zone. We're not doing extra laps at the end of the day. We're not trying other climbs, and so when we're in a peaking phase, we drop in fitness. And so where a second tier would come in would be maybe on that Sunday, or on, if you get a climb during the following week, would be to go out and have a whole different climbing day where you're working on 12 plus 13 minus routes that are going to still help you keep your fitness up and still help you improve those highly technical skills that you wouldn't get just doing mileage.
Yeah, and I think something that's important to note is that you have to be completely honest with yourself about what those second tier routes are, because I see a lot of people who are very project averse, and they don't like projecting, and part of the reason for that is because they don't quite understand it. So what they deem to be their second tier routes might not be their actual second tier routes. You said something important, that it should be a couple numbers below your hardest red points or your project, but you shouldn't be able to on-site it. And I talk to so many people who are on-siting at their top level because they don't understand how to project or just don't like it or whatever. But if you're on-siting it, that's not your second tier.
Right. And a lot of people don't believe in their ability to climb hard. And so you've seen that. My on-site is 11D and my hardest red point is 12A.
Right.
That I did second go.
Yep.
There's a really great, 8A is a really cool tool if you go and you look at the top climbers in the world, because you can see their on-sites and their red points. And one of the big rules of thumb in climbing is that most climbers that are successful can go 4 grades or 1 full US number grade harder on their red point than they can on their on-site.
Yep.
There's a little bit of variability there, but for the most part, if you're not there, you're probably lacking in one or the other.
Yeah.
And so then the second tier falls somewhere in between those.
Yep.
The other thing I'll say about second tier is it's your opportunity to get better at climbing. Your first tier almost always defaults to something that you like. It's endurance oriented because I'm an endurance climber. If I'm going to break into the next higher grade, it's going to be a kind of route that suits me. Right. The second tier is my opportunity to bring up all those skills that I've been lacking. So if we're still at that 513 as a 13A as a second tier, you should be doing 13A slabs or finger cracks or whatever you're not good at.
Yep, totally.
And that is your opportunity for growth.
Yeah. All right. Let's look at the next one. Pablo Fernandez says, in Steve's strength book, he recommends the get up as the single best exercise. And with the popularity of the deadlift, including your own book, is that still the case, and why?
I think if you could only do one exercise, the get up would be best because there's more total body involvement.
Right.
There's a lot of mobility and stability in the shoulder with the get up.
Right.
And the core involvement is very similar to climbing. And so I still think that's the single best exercise. The deadlift is the best hip hinge exercise, and the best for creating that tension in the posterior chain. And there's really not a situation where you should have to choose between one or the other.
Right.
But I do believe you should do the minimum possible of each one of those, because again, they fall into that supporting stuff, and we want to keep in mind that, like the climbing is the thing.
Yep.
Deadlifting, I probably pull once every 10 days now, and I'll do maybe 3 sets of 2, and I can still maintain my strength from last December. So we're talking in May, so 5 months of very low volume, very infrequent deadlifting, and I can maintain the same strength. I just need to be strong enough to climb. I don't need to set a deadlift record. And so the same thing with the get up. The get up is nice as a warm up. It's nice as a strength session in between bouldering days, and it's much less neurologically damaging than the deadlift. When you're pulling heavy on those, it can set you back a few days.
Yeah, and I think the get up is a really great awareness tool as well, because you can really break it down like a really hard boulder problem and focus in on a lot of the tiny little things that are going on to make a get up really good.
Yeah, and it doesn't take much. Like one of the workouts we'll prescribe for our athletes is out of a book by Pavel Satsulin called Simple and Sinister, and it's 5 sets of 10 swings and 5 sets of 1 get up on each side, and it's pretty simple to get through, and it gives you a whole lot. And then again, we've got this strength covered. Move on into your skill-based bouldering.
Yeah, I start almost every strength workout I do with 3 get-ups on each side and 3 sets of 10 swings.
Yep. It's a very good place to start.
Yeah. Okay, Brendan Quinn, who we mentioned in the last episode, has a big overarching question here on how would you like to see the principles and philosophy outlined in logical progression impact the future of climbing training?
What I'd like is for all climbers to have all the options. To have all the tools that are at their fingertips, so they can look at it and say, oh, okay, maybe I should try this instead. What I would like to see is people that think they're too busy to train, or they just can't stick with the organization of it, find out that they can still progress.
Right.
And the underlying thing that I try to put forth with all of my athletes is that there is a way forward, and it doesn't matter how old you are or how injured you are or
how little time you have.
Yeah, you can get better. I mean, I'll give you a good example. We have this really well-known alpine climber and rock climber that lives here in Lander. His name's Mike Lilligren, and he did his hardest...
And dancer.
Yeah, and a dancer, right. He did his hardest climbing maybe in the mid-1990s, and he's getting close to 50 now, and he's now surpassing that level from the mid-90s.
I just saw he's back in here training, right?
Yeah, he's
awesome.
He's doing a lot, and he's super focused. He's had to instead of being just go out to the crag and climb guy, he has to be pretty planned in what he does at the crag. But this guy is going to climb 513, which will be the hardest he's ever red pointed, and it'll probably be in the next 5 to 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the value of all of these plans, is like find a plan that works for the guy and turn him loose on it.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Next is from Mark Segrist, who is our resident deep thinker. He always dumps these big thoughts on our community page, and I hate him for it because I get sucked into them and have to read them even if I don't have time to read them. So his question is, what are your thoughts on linear versus nonlinear for climbers in different regions and situations, like the long southern Chattanooga, which is where Mark lives, off season, where going outside is heinously pointless, because it's 100 degrees and tons of humidity. What do you see pros and cons of either?
Yeah, especially going back to if you've got the time for it, long cycle training is appropriate. But I still hate linear.
Still not a linear progression.
I still hate it in general for everybody. And so that's where we get into that block style periodization, and block periodization is, let's call it a hybrid of the two, and it's. I think in every respect, the most appropriate training, programming for climbing. And basically what that is we'll say, for this 6 weeks, we're focusing on strength, but we're going to simmer our power and our endurance and all those sorts of things.
Right.
And then you'd move to a power block and simmer all the other ones. And so you do just enough to maintain those. It's like the deadlifting we talked about this, a couple questions ago. I'm not focusing on getting stronger on that, but I want to maintain that.
Right.
So we do as little of those other things as possible. And so I think that somewhere in between is what he's looking for.
Yep. And I think that's more the style I generally defaulted to when I was training for climbing in the red.
Yep.
And the people that I worked with, is we kept things on the back burner, and had them there maintaining while focusing on something else.
Yeah, you should figure out how strong your fingers are and then never give any on that. Like, you should maintain that finger strength for as long as you can and then try to improve on it. But if you can, on a dynamometer, close 180 pounds, like, you should never, in no season, should let that go away. But you should also, when you're training up your endurance, training up your energy system work, you should do that as little as possible. And maybe it's once every 6 days, maybe every 8 days. And that's where training logging is critical, and planning is really critical. Like I would say, spread your hangboard sessions out as far as you can possibly can.
Right.
And then, maybe you can get away with it once every 12 days.
Right. And I think it's an easy jump for people to make when they are really good at something, to do it more often. Right. I think that's pretty natural. Well, and maybe the opposite of what they should be doing.
Yeah. And I loved Dave McLeod at some point says, the enemy is your tastes. And I think that's the interesting thing too. And this is sort of divergent.
For training purposes.
Right. Yeah. Right. But yeah, you're like, oh, I'm good at dynos, I'm going to do more dynos.
Right.
And I think that one of the things that people tend to do is, if a little bit of training is good, their natural step is to do more of that. Like, oh, I really like campusing. Campusing has improved my finger power, whatever.
Right. Let's keep it going.
I'm going to double it. I'm going to go twice as much. And, that's disaster time.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So I think what's important to recognize about Mark's question is that you can still fit nonlinear periodization into a longer form, climbing cycle or training cycle.
Yep. I think, and I haven't talked to Mark about this, Mark Anderson, but one of the things that he's been implementing is normal strength and power cycles through the winter, and then when it comes time to be in a peaking cycle, going to a nonlinear style of training, where by bringing in all of those things, he can then maintain longer peaks. And I don't know the exact details on it, but that's really common, and we see that with our athletes. And it's a lot of what I've done for myself is like, gosh, I have a whole month, and I'm definitely not going to be at the crag. Let's put all of our energy into getting stronger. Let's really work this stuff, and then we can go into a nonlinear when we're feeling a little more fit.
Yep. Mark also had a question about progression regardless of programming style, and how do we measure it? And this again could be a whole podcast to itself, and maybe should be and will be, but how do you measure your progress in climbing when it's a tough thing to measure?
Right. So there's a lot of those things. Like that's one of the attractions of weight training or endurance sports is like you go like,
so easy to measure.
I'm faster. I'm stronger or whatever. It's pretty easy on in finger strength. You can use a dynamometer, which is like a hand gripper with a spring on it that allows you to get a number on how much you can close your hand isometrically. And that's a useful tool in several regards, including knowing whether you're ready to train that day. But and then you should also be able to go with 50 pounds on my waist. I can hold this edge for this long, and the finger strength stuff like isometric hanging, you should be able to have good numbers on. The climbing is a little more difficult.
Right.
And sometimes you'll have landmark routes, you'll have specific boulder problems that you can do, but there's so much that goes into that, including skill, body weight, fatigue, mental state, that it becomes more difficult to say, I'm actually stronger.
Especially when you're making small gains instead of just, if you jump from 12A to 13A, then it's fairly clear that you got better.
Yep.
But sometimes going from 13A to 13B, you can do that without necessarily getting better.
Right. And there's always the variability of how hard the problems are at the gym you're in versus outside versus all those things. But over time, a collection of a lot of data starts to tell a story. And so I would say you can look at how many of each grade that you red pointed any given month and look at them over time. Like in my training logging, I can go back and look at every grade from like maybe 12A up. And I can see how many of each of those I've done in a given month, just because of it's completely accidentally the way I laid it out when I started keeping track. But then you go like, oh, okay, wow, look, I really red point a lot of routes in March and in October and in November. And and over time I've seen those numbers improve.
Right.
And so that kind of stuff, even though I may know that style of route better, or I might be improving a specific facet of my fitness, over time we're seeing those things, those patterns emerge. And it's hard on like a weekly scale, but if you can step back and look at a year worth of data, I think it starts to tell a better story.
Yeah, and I think you definitely talk about the value of thinking about training in terms of putting money in the bank and looking at it over the long term instead of, I just trained for 6 weeks and I'm not any stronger, so that training plan didn't work,
Yeah.
And I think you should measure your climbing in the same way.
Yeah. And looking at the, am I getting better? And that's the thing, like stronger and better are two different things.
Right.
And you want both.
Yep.
But better is the goal. Mm-hmm. Like I don't want to be they have that
right.
dyno
You want stronger
contest.
to support better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like the world's largest dyno. And
right.
It's like, that'd be great to win that, but I really care more about red pointing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I think that's a good answer. Next, we've got two guys had a really similar question, John Roderick and Aaron Back. And their question was, for integrated strength training, how do you replace the deadlift if you just don't have access? And what would it look like with kettlebells? What kettlebell exercises might work for your integrated strength training?
Kettlebell deadlifts.
Really big kettlebells.
Yeah, you need a bunch. No, and so we like the deadlift because of the hormonal value of heavy weight training.
Right. And that's going to be the trick with kettlebells, is getting something heavy enough for that hormonal response.
But that being said, depending what else you do in the session, we're still going to get that hormonal letdown if you do like if you have kettlebells, you can do heavy rack squats. You know, if you do rack squats at, you know, say, I don't know, you know, 140 or something, you know, you're getting the same value as a you know, 200-pound deadlift or something. And so I would say it's not wrong to do like kettlebell swings. The other thing is glute bridges are really good, like the single leg bridges. Hip extensions can be useful. We have, I think I did an article on integrated strength a couple of months ago where we had a body weight only version of it, and it is glute bridges and single leg squats, single arm push-ups.
And are you more looking for the time component of it there, or is it, you know, are you getting the same or any hormonal response that you're looking for the finger strength training?
You are, yeah. It might be on a different level, but the fact that you're doing it at all, because you're using the big muscles, you're overloading those big muscles. And as long as we stay in that zone of, you know, something where 5 reps is pretty tough.
Yep.
You're going to do pretty well.
Okay. Gotcha.
And that's just an interesting thing. I read, there was Dan Mirsky wrote a pretty good article about strength training. And I can't remember, it was like on some,
It's on Friction Labs. Yeah.
Yeah. And he just got lambasted by these people that
I saw that.
They failed to understand the reason that we do those lifts. And,
right.
And I think Dan's got I don't even know him, but he's got a great understanding of training climbers.
Yep.
And I think that's that classic, like, I don't understand it, so I'm going to criticize it.
Right.
But it's one of those things, like, try it. And if it doesn't work for you, don't do it anymore. You know? And then, but like, to just come flat out and argue against it, not having been in that zone. I think that's a sophomoric,
behavior. I think anytime a response starts with "this is stupid," then it might be a response just worth skipping over.
Right. Yeah.
And I like the integrated strength, and I've been using it a lot with my clients and myself, and I know our guys use it. Paul, our kettlebell guy, has had great results with it, using kettlebells and doing exactly what you're saying, front, you know, rack squats, big heavy kettlebell movements, along with his finger strength training. And I don't know the science well enough to say what the hormonal responses are with different lifts and different weights, but I really like the time saving component of it, and that you don't end up in that classic, photo of weightlifting gyms with 10 people sitting around on benches.
Right.
You know, you've got something going on. So I think it helps people feel like they're getting a lot done, and it saves them a lot of time, which is important for most everybody.
Well, and hangboarding is almost always diminished by the fact that we get bored.
Right.
Between, like, if we're doing max hangs, and so you're like, okay, I did a max hang, and I'm supposed to rest for however long. Right. And then if you go like, oh, I did a max hang, and now I'm going to go do something else. I don't care. You don't have to deadlift. The get up would be a great substitution there. Do get ups, or do something. But a strength exercise. Yep. I've got athletes that do hangboard, heavy core, and mobility as that triplet. Yep. And without the strength component. Yep. Just working on core stuff, and that probably has a less hormonal effect. But the fact that you're doing other stuff besides forearms, you're getting things done. It's going to improve that. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Van Doan, who I believe is coming to the
he's coming
seminar.
To the coaching clinic. Yep. Yeah.
He asks, how do we apply logical progression to mobility and flexibility?
That'll be covered in the seminar. No. Yeah. So the mobility and flexibility should be integrated with the sessions. And one of the things I line out in there, and the strength session that I recommend is to do integrated strength. And so then the mobility and flexibility would be there. Then with the bouldering component, I would say take off your shoes and do your flexibility in between boulder problems. That's a win-win with bouldering anyway.
Yeah.
Like if you're really climbing very hard on the boulders at all, you need to be focused on climbing harder rather than more boulders. And
Right.
so climb a hard boulder, take off your shoes, do a mobility drill. And then you could do the same with the energy system work. There's a lot in the energy system workouts lined out in the book. There's a lot of time. Like you get fatigued and we need to recover, and that's the time to do mobility. The Facebook is the enemy of flexibility because people instantly go to their phones.
Yeah.
And I think that or Instagram or whatever it is that's your current personal preference. And so I think one of the great things that we learned from Lee Brown, who's one of our coaches, is that this is your time. And you put the phone away, come in and train. It's quiet. The second that, Instagram pops up, your phone rings, whatever, somebody is taking your attention.
Right.
You're giving your attention away for free. And this one time of the day, you should give that attention to yourself.
Yep.
And so that's any time that you're resting between sets is time to do mobility.
Yep. I like having mobility and flexibility worked into a session that way because I have even as a former gymnast, I have a really hard time now just stretching.
Yeah.
Or just doing mobility work.
Well, isn't that interesting? That's a kind of a tangent, but it's important tangent. I think one of the reasons people don't like it is because it's hard to quantify.
Exactly.
And
you see really slow results.
Yeah.
And that's
like
difficult.
If we had a splits percentage measurer,
Yeah.
and you were seeing gains there, we'd do it a lot.
Yep.
Or your turnout. We do the frog a lot as a turnout exercise. And if I could get people that, way to measure that, they'd do it all the time.
Yeah,
But
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough. And let's see. Daryl Bickle asks, he asked for both of our thoughts on the no-hang method of finger strength training. So like the gripple and, things that you're holding instead of hanging from for finger strength.
I think that there's a benefit there in that it puts less traction stress on the shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
However, traction
Climbing
stress on
sort
the
of
shoulder
stresses your shoulders. So.
does, right? And so I understand where they're coming from. It's quantifiable. It's nice to be able to go, I can hang, 285.5 on this thing, but I don't feel like that's the way in the light. We do like it. I've got a guy that's training a lot of ring finger and little finger individual stuff for some specific routes, and I do like hanging weight from those. But I don't think I think it's a tool, but it's not a revolution.
Yeah, I'm of the same mind that you are, that I'm sure it does put less stress on your shoulders and that whole structure, but climbing stresses those structures. And if you're not able to hang from your fingers on an edge without injuring your shoulders, then there's something else you need to be doing other than finger strength training.
Yep.
So.
Well, and I think that there's a real place for those in warm-ups. And, I bet like a grip pull, or we got these things called, what is it? Crimp works. They're two edges that are connected by a bungee. And they're
I haven't
awesome.
seen those.
Yeah, they're a really cool little tool and wonderful, like if you're traveling, but also like super good warm up because you can warm up real slow into it. And so instead of like having to do a counterbalance or a counterweight pulley system or whatever to get your fingers ready for a hangboard session, I think those are going to be a really good tool.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll be interested to see those. Van had another question. How do we continue to progress over long climbing trips? And I know that Van just left on what's going to be a long climbing trip, so I'm sure this is a personally pertinent question to him. But how do you apply logical progression if you're on a climbing trip and don't have a super consistent way to train?
Well, I think the thing is you've got to strip it down to its essence, which is let's work a different energy system each training session. You say, I'm going to work strength. I'm going to be, working on these highly intense things, which we do lose when we're traveling. One of my athletes is a traveling nurse, and he will go to one location for 4 weeks and another one. So he lives in his van,
right?
And so it doesn't matter where he is. He just got done with a stint in Joshua Tree, and so he bouldered there, and then he worked hangboard at night in the van. And so I think what you need to do is say, like, I'm going to do a strength day. Whether it means I'm doing a strength workout in the parking lot at Smith or what.
Right.
And then I'm going to have a day when I'm working on explosiveness, and then I'm going to have a day that I'm working on my energy system stuff. And some of that's going to be easier if you stopped in at a climbing gym. Some of it's going to be easier at the crag. But it is how strong can you stay? And these tools like the Flashboard, and the Awesome Woodies boards, and all those traveling hangboards, it makes it possible to keep your fingers strong no matter
great.
what you're doing. We have these instructors for the National Outdoor Leadership School here that are now taking those hangboards out into the mountains with them so that they can stay strong. So that but after they're done teaching for a month in the mountains, they can come back and still rock climb.
Right.
Well.
Still have some finger strength.
And so I think it is just a matter of, staying organized enough and understanding that travel isn't going to be when you're going to make your hugest gains, but you can avoid making those huge losses.
Yep. And I think that, beyond just the training and using the available tools that you have, it's also a good time to really focus on the practice of climbing and not letting your outdoor sessions devolve into just performance all the time.
Right.
If you can really dig into the tiny aspects of, moving really well or learning better tactics and all these things that combine to make you a better climber, I think that's a smart way to look at it too.
Yeah. Well, Segrist is a really great example. Jonathan, he climbs outside all the time, and he climbs on lots of different rock, switches, he's been switching into bouldering. He gets on all kinds of different stone. And so his practice is maximized and it's, the proof's in the pudding, he's really able to perform well.
Yep. And he's spent time, training in the traditional sense. And I think he's done a good job of realizing, okay, I've maximized this for now.
Yeah.
Let me kind of follow my stoke and go this way and dig into this, this aspect of climbing. So.
And as far as I can see, he's avoided that ego trap of thinking he knows everything.
Right.
Which is really great, because I think the next couple of years are going to see some spectacular stuff come from that guy. So.
For sure. And then I had a few questions from the book. Number one, in the program examples, and they are just examples, and I understand that, but you had back-to-back strength followed by a bouldering day and never had it the other way around. And I'm just curious if there was a logic behind that.
Yeah, the thing I found is that people will go deep bouldering, but they'll usually follow the plan on the strength day. And so they won't just get hung up on a project and, I'm just going to keep working deadlifts till I get this or
Right.
something, right?
Right.
And so usually people come out of the bouldering day more tired.
Yeah, it's easier to get them to cut
yeah.
off a strength session
Yep.
than it is to cut off a bouldering session.
Yeah. That being said, though, Chris, one of the things that we do with our athletes is have them train strength after a climbing day. If they like in season, a couple of our guys they'll red point on like Sunday and Wednesday, and then Sunday night and Wednesday night they come into the gym and do their
Right.
strength work.
Yep.
Because of the recovery component there, but that's at a really elite level. And so for most people's strength isn't that intense, and they can probably boulder fine the next day. And so that's the main reason I did it. It would probably work okay the other way around.
Yep, I gotcha. That makes perfect sense. I hadn't thought about that at all because I tend toward doing my strength training either immediately after climbing or doing it the following day.
Yeah.
But you're right. A lot of people will follow my bouldering session layout and then add notes. Oh, added an hour and a half of working on V7s. you
Yeah.
know. So you're right.
Yeah,
They
and
definitely
it's-
tend to go deeper.
Yeah, it's fun. And so that's why I like the strength is never like, I shouldn't say never, but it's really rare that I find somebody that just digs on hangboarding and weight training,
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And then I also had a question about if a climber has really distinct strengths and weaknesses, should the frequency in your nonlinear periodization plan, should the frequency that they train those aspects of their climbing change?
Yeah, that's a good place to go. I think it's beyond the scope of what I've written to give those specific recommendations. But for example, if your finger strength is really poor, you could do a strength session, then a power session, then another strength session, and then the energy system session.
Gotcha.
Rather than just sequencing through those three in a normal fashion.
Right.
Or if they have a specific goal coming up, like they've got a superpower endurance route, they could put in those with more frequency, but always being aware of what's the result. Am I seeing improvements in these sessions? Am I doing too many of them? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, and that was my follow-up question. If they have a specific trip, if they live in California where everything's vertical and they're taking a Red River trip for a month, should their training plan change to reflect that?
Yeah, and that's kind of, if we go back to that 4-week example, I'll say stick with the same sequence on these things for 4 or 8 or even 12 weeks, depending how frequently you can do the sessions. But yeah, adapt to what you've got coming up.
Yep.
It's like we talked about with Alex, he's had to do all this work capacity stuff and everybody else is out bouldering and having fun. And
Right.
And here he is like doing, high volume weight training and laps in the Killer Cave,
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah, I saw him out in the Killer Cave doing a bunch of things the other day.
Yeah.
So
And it's stuff that's relatively easy for him, but it's the kind of work like, you just got to be able to do the work. And so if I'm getting ready to go to the red, I've got to get on steeper stuff. I got to start crimping,
Right.
So
Right.
And you can, and that's the thing, that's the flexibility of the plan. I think the underlying thing is it's probably not wrong as long as you're getting regular stimuli and you're progressing session to session. You want to have some kind of structure there.
And the progressing session to session, I just have a question about that. We talk a lot about you want to keep progressing, and if you're not progressing, then rethink things or make a change. A lot of the people I work with, and I imagine a lot of the people you work with, Emily and I were just talking about this last night, that oftentimes things get in the way and your real life pops up. And should those people take that, I didn't progress this session because I came in emotionally a wreck from dealing with family problems or whatever, should that count toward their I didn't progress this session?
Yeah, I think that we use this thing called the 1-6-3 rule, which is like out of every 10 sessions, one of them's going to feel really great. and 6 of them are going to be okay, and you're just punching the clock, and then 3 of them are going to suck. And you're going to feel like you hate the sport and you never want to lift weights again or whatever it is.
Right.
And so I think when we say progressing session to session, there's always a way forward, but the sessions also need to happen when you're ready for those sessions.
Right.
Like just because it's Monday and you've got time to train and you're feeling crappy from yesterday, maybe it's time for a rest day.
Yep.
And building that flexibility and giving yourself permission to not train that day is as important as progressing the sessions. Now, when I say progressing session to session, we just want to make sure that you're not staying flat, because
Right.
people will use the word routine, and routine it tends to indicate we're doing the same thing over and over and over. And say you're doing, like, we'll go back to the get-ups, you do 5 sets of get-ups, 1 on each side. And if you've always done them with a 40-pound kettlebell, and you do 1 set with 44, well, that's progress to me.
Yep.
And
I think you can also progress the quality of your, if you're in tune enough to pay attention to those things and understand those things. My get-ups right now, because I haven't done them in a while, are really rusty. So my progress is in quality more than anything else.
Yeah. And I think that assessment at the end of the hugest take home with training logs is to assess at the end of the session. You don't just write down all your shit. I mean,
Right.
like, what you did, but like, I felt good this session, or my power was down this session, or
Right.
I can't wait till next Tuesday. Those sorts of things, like a 2-sentence assessment, and then either a weekly or monthly overall assessment. This program really worked well. I'm happy with it, because if you have a program that works well and it turned up a bunch of red points, like, that's a really good indicator that we want to come back there and that the progress was correct.
Right.
And so again, we want to make sure that we're seeing that athlete move forward rather than just staying flat all the time. I always, like, we got a guy that comes in, he's come in the gym for 10 years. He throws 115 on the bench press. He does 3 sets of 10,
Right.
and then he's out of here. And like, for 10 years, and like, the greatest gift in the world I could give him would be to sneak another 2 pounds on there, right? And you're just like, oh my God, all of a sudden we're moving forward again, right?
Change the numbers on your weights. So
Yeah,
that-
you race them. But that's the thing that's really interesting is getting out of that mentality of, this is where I am, my fixed mindset.
Yep.
How can I go forward?
Yep. Okay. I think we just about covered it. So I appreciate you answering these questions, and
Good
I'm sure
questions.
we'll have tons more of these in the future. So
Yeah, and the ultimate goal of any of these is to one day not have any more questions to answer.
good luck.
So, all right, thanks, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I have a feeling Steve's never going to reach that goal, because as long as there are climbers out there, there's always going to be questions about how to get better. And big thanks to our Facebook community group for all the great questions. I appreciate how active you guys are over there. And, if you guys have been thinking about becoming a patron, now is the time. We've got some great things about to happen over there. It's, once again, patreon.com/Power Company Podcast, or you can go to powercompanyclimbing.com and click on the podcast tab. There are more bonus episodes just like this one coming for the patrons. And for all of you, please share us with your friends. Share us on your social medias. You can find us on the Facebooks, the Pinterests, the Instagrams. You cannot find us on the Twitter, because we don't tweet. We scream like eagles.
When you don't know.
This time, this time, this time, this time, this time to build, this time to build, this time to build, this time, this time to build, this time to build, this time to build, this time, power, power, this time to build, power, this time to build, power, this time to build, power. This time to build power. This time time to build. It's time to build. It's time to build. It's time to build. It's time to build.